One of the architects of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, joins us now, MIT economics professor Jonathan Gruber. Jonathan, what do you think about this new fix the president just announced, allowing people who were going to lose their insurance policies to keep them for another year? What's your reaction?
My reaction is I'm sorry we're in this situation. I think that what the president said that's exactly right is the Affordable Care Act is the minimally disruptive way to get to where we need to get in America, which is to fix our broken and discriminatory insurance markets. Unfortunately, people in Congress didn't think that was good enough. They wanted to both fix the broken insurance markets and make sure that no one lost. You can't do that. If you're going to fix a broken insurance market, some people who are benefiting from that broken market are going to have to pay more. The president had to deal with that issue, and I thought he dealt with that issue in an effective way, in really a minimally disruptive way, by allowing one more year for people to keep their plans. It's also a good solution, I think, because it takes a bit of the pressure off the web failure, because it gives people a little more time to sign up.
Well, Jonathan, to be fair to the members of Congress who have been objecting to this wrinkle in the law, President Obama did say repeatedly, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan, period. I guess he should not have made that promise, or he should have been clearer about it, don't you think?
He absolutely should have been vaguer in his statement, but the job of people in Congress, at least in my view, is not to worry about wordsmithing, but to make the best possible policy. I think the Affordable Care Act struck the right balance of trying to minimize the disruption to people who have insurance while moving to a system that's very popular. A non-discriminatory insurance system is the #1 thing Americans want to see out of this law. And I think people in Congress need to recognize that involves trade-offs. They may be uncomfortable, but Congress people don't want to make those trade-offs.
I mean, one of the issues that I heard before President Obama made this announcement today is people in his administration, Obama administration officials, said that allowing individuals to keep their policies, even if they didn't meet the standards set by Obamacare, would undermine Obamacare. Do you agree?
I believe that something like the Landrieu bill, or especially the Upton bill, would have undermined Obamacare because they're open-ended, so people could keep their plans forever. And what that would mean rate shock in 2015 and an ongoing problem of higher rates. The advantage of what the president proposed is that it's close-ended. It deals with the transition problem. It deals with the website problems people are having, but ends so that insurers can still in 2015 have the certainty that they can set reasonable rates without worrying about healthy people staying out of the risk pool.
And explain why so many of these insurance companies are ending policies. Some of the policies obviously are junk policies, but not all of them. The requirements for Obamacare set standards that not everybody, for instance, a 65-year-old man who is covered with individual insurance would not have a plan with maternity care. Now he would. Can you explain to our viewers why that would be and why these plans that are not junk plans are not meeting these standards?
Sure. So there's two issues you raise. One is, what is the right standard? And that's a hard question. What the president decided and what Congress decided was insurance should no longer discriminate by gender. What that means is women should not pay more for their insurance than men. That means everyone's going to have to pay for maternity coverage. Likewise, people who use prescriptions shouldn't have to pay more than people who don't. So every insurance plan will cover prescription coverage, etc. That was a policy decision that was made by the president and Congress. A separate issue is, what about people who, because of the existing discriminatory nature of the insurance market, got very favorably priced products? People who'd never been sick, so insurance companies gave them products at very steep discounts, recognizing that when those people got sick, they'd then eventually pay higher prices that could get dropped. Those people are upset because they're going to pay more. What those people, I would hope, would appreciate would be the benefit of a world where if they do get sick tomorrow, they won't then get dropped or pay higher prices. And that's what they're getting out of Obamacare. But in the meantime, they'll be paying higher prices.
And Jonathan, you were also the architect of Romney Care in Massachusetts. And I know you and I talked about this yesterday on my show, The Lead. We talked about the fact that there were very few enrollees initially with Romney Care, although we also talked about the fact that people were not getting kicked off their policies at the rate is going on a national level with Obamacare. Can you tell us about the website for Romney Care? Did you have the same types of problems that the healthcare.gov website is having, with only 27,000 Americans able to enroll in a plan?
The website for Romney Care was a lot easier. I mean, it went more smoothly. It was a little rough at the beginning, went more smoothly, but it was also a much easier lift, because the key thing is we weren't doing a lot of the eligibility determination functions that are being done by the federal website. So it's a bigger lift. Look, my view is, as I said yesterday, I think given all the website problems, to actually have 100,000 people signed up, which is about 1.5% of their target, is actually pretty good compared to what we did in Massachusetts with even fewer website problems.
Although they need to have 7 million people signed up by the spring. One other thing, President Obama today was saying that he did not think that this would happen with individuals being kicked off their plan. He knew that some plans wouldn't meet standard, but he thought people would go on to Obamacare and find better deals. If you look at what was in the Federal Register, if you look at President Obama's own comments from that healthcare forum he had at Blair House in 2010, he very clearly knew that 7 to 9 million Americans were going to lose their coverage, whether they liked it or not. Can you explain, as an architect of a similar plan and also as somebody who helped write the Affordable Care Act, what was supposed to happen with those 7 to 9 million Americans who were going to be kicked off their plan, whether they liked it or not?
So what was supposed to happen, first of all, I think the number is more like 6 million, but the bottom line is there are millions of people whose plans wouldn't qualify. And the idea was that if they were low income, they'd be able to go into the exchange and get tax credits. And they will once the website's working and they can see that. So the idea was the concern people would have with losing their plans would be offset by seeing the beneficial tax credits they'd get. Now, that wouldn't apply to everyone. Some people who had really substandard plans, which, for example, didn't cover the hospital, which is not real insurance, would have to buy up, and they would pay more, but the hope is they'd appreciate the extra coverage they were getting.
About how many of the 6 million or so Americans had what you would call substandard or junk plans? Is it a majority of the 6 million? Is it a small percentage?
You know, we don't really know. If I had to guess, I'd say half, but the truth is we honestly don't really know.
And Jonathan, are you surprised at the kerfuffle, at all the controversy that has happened since the launch of Obamacare on October 1st?
You know, I'm not. I can't remember in my lifetime a law where once it was passed, the opposing party only ramped up their opposition to it rather than standing down and moving on to the next topic. You can contrast it with Medicare Part D, which was passed almost on a purely partisan basis. There was a few Democrats that voted for it. And yet, once it was passed, the Democrats sort of rolled over and said, despite the fact that it had huge implementation problems, much like Obamacare does, they didn't try to repeal it. They weren't trying to go after it in this way. So I'm not surprised. It's really an unfortunate commentary on our political system that really, fundamentally, Obamacare is a very bipartisan structure. Look, it was based on ideas proposed by the Heritage Foundation and initially endorsed by a Republican governor of Massachusetts. And Obama, to his credit, said, I'm going to take this Republican idea and adopt it. And suddenly, once he adopted it, it was terrible. And that's what's really frustrating.
I want to get a reaction to you from a statement put out by the insurance industry. And if we could put that full screen up. It said, changing the rules after health plans have already met the requirements of the law could destabilize the market and result in higher premiums for consumers. That's from the Americans Health Insurance Plans Organizations, AHIP, as you know. So she says it could destabilize the market.
You know, the insurers have every right to be upset today. They were very good actors in this. They made a trade-off. They said, we will end the discriminatory practices, which have basically been a lot of how we've made our money over the past 40 years, in return for everyone coming together in this fairly priced insurance market. All the proposals in Congress would have fundamentally broken that contract in a major way. The president's proposal breaks that contract in a little bit of a way, because it says in 2014, some of those folks you thought would come into these markets now won't be coming in, and the insurers have a right to be upset. I think that it speaks to the fundamental misunderstanding that led to this whole effort about the fact that somehow we can magically fix insurance markets but not create any losers.
All right, Jonathan Gruber, economics professor at MIT, one of the architects of the Romney Care law and somebody who helped form Obamacare. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're going to